It is not a scientific endeavor?
Yes, I think they have violated scientific ethics.
Well,
they have come out on a grandstand with this thing without having proper scientific review.
Is that why the Lawrence Livermore Labs published their results in the newspaper?
They published the results on what would happen if the soot that you predict in the air actually existed, but they didn't talk about the scavenging processes that you completely ignored in your studies.
The scavenging processes are totally in. They're not my studies. They're done by atmospheric physicists.
I know, but you took it and ran on with the doom scenario as you did in the past with population.
But basically, if we could summarize what you're saying, then, Dr. Ehrlich, you're saying is tonight's movie is very optimistic as to what could possibly happen.
It is a movie that's very dramatic and moving and shows a lot of the effects of a nuclear war, but does not accurately show the long-term effects of a nuclear war.
That's true. It doesn't, because from the other point I'm speaking, if civil defense were there, it would be different.
And you're saying the destruction could be a lot worse than depicted or less tonight?
The destruction could be worse than depicted, but we can defend against it.
Well, Kansas City does have an emergency evacuation plan. We ask our Michael Mahoney to look into it.
If there's enough warning, the night before the day after might look like this. But the evacuation traffic would be much heavier than this 5 o'clock rush hour.
You must leave now, take what you need, you think will last.
The plan is to move as many as possible to rural areas, generally on the same side of town you live. But other than naming the roads to use and the counties to go to, not a lot has been done in preparation. And many of the refuge areas are close to possible targets. Whiteman's missiles to the east, McConnell's to the west, and the Strategic Air Command Center north in Omaha. There are scores of fallout shelters in the city, but many of the signs that indicate them have been removed, and no supplies are stored in the facilities. And nobody knows how we'll react.
People will be in a state of shock and disbelief to some extent, and not everybody will immediately follow directions.
Based on previous disasters, here's what could happen. First, people may not believe it. Only 25% of the people beneath Mount St. Helens moved out despite days of warnings. Phone lines will be hopelessly tied up, and the churches may be crowded. So if we had to flee tonight, we'd be using an incomplete plan. But the alternative to it is no plan at all. Michael Mahoney, Channel 9 News.
Mr. Brani, you head the Regional Disaster Planning Agency. How prepared are we in the Kansas City area?
We are not as prepared as we will be. We have made great strides in the 2.5 years I've been here. I think I'd like to comment a little bit on the movie, because to me the movie shows, in the one word, a challenge. A challenge that comes to me in this movie, that there is a lot that can be done that wasn't done in that movie. People needlessly died. People needlessly became involved in sicknesses.
Specifically, what could be done?
Specifically, for example, people did not take radiation seriously. Specifically, the family that survived the best was the one who took the simple steps in the farmhouse and went downstairs. Specifically, I could tell, because we're limited on time, I can tell you this. There's a book entitled In Time of Emergency. It's available. All you have to do is call or write FEMA, 911 Walnut, Kansas City, Missouri. All of civil defense is integrated. Only 77 cents per person per year is spent on civil defense. Of that 77 cents, less than a dime is on attack preparedness. All of the procedures that we go through to make all disasters, earthquakes, tornadoes, floods, etc., go into effect are all part and parcel of civil defense. Civil defense has and can save lives.
Not everyone can write for the book, or probably will. So basically, how do we tell what radiation is? How do we know how long to stay inside?
Okay, the easiest way is the emergency broadcasting system, which during the film was functioning because there is anti-electric magnetic pulse equipment available. We'll tell you through your portable radios what to do. The basic mistakes made in there: one, they came up too soon. Two, some of the steps that they had, that they took place in there, the evacuation procedures, Michael's right. In most cases, people follow advice. I've been in charge of 4 major disasters since I've come aboard. I find that the movie showed people in the darkest light, in the worst possible light, and that I find in the disasters time and time again that people act in a Christian manner, that God never gave you a burden that you couldn't solve. It's a hopeless movie. It's a movie that strikes at the core that somehow, some way, you should give up hope. And we do not believe in that concept. Civil defense is hope. It will work, it will function, and it's...
What percentage could survive in our Kansas City area?
I don't know, but more would survive from civil defense than without civil defense. A lot of needless people would not die. A lot of needless suffering that was shown on that show would not occur with simple civil defense.
Now to our doctors, Jennifer Leaning and Sidney Williams. Can radiation be treated? First, Dr. Leaning.
Radiation can't be treated in the sense of cured. You can do a minimal intervention or a major intervention, depending upon how many doctors, how much you have in terms of resources, the hospitals that survive, and there are levels of radiation exposure that will, to some extent, be healed by the body's own defense mechanism. But the kind of radiation that would exist in the Kansas City, Lawrence, Midwest area after that kind of nuclear attack will, in general, be beyond the capacity of the medical establishment to cure.
Unless there are shelters, of course.
That also depends upon the kind of shelters and the shelter use. And there's a tremendous exaggeration about the protective capacity of shelters.
Oh no, that's
taking place in civil
physically,
defense
one can
literature.
calculate the protection factor
Dr.
easily.
Holland, you've had your time. My time,
I won't allow
point
lies
out
to be said.
that
Just a
there-
moment. We'll talk with you in just a second, Mr.
There
Hall.
is tremendous disagreement, even within the government literature, about the extent to which people are going to stay in the shelters that they can get to.
The
Arms
Amazon
Control and
Stop Fight
Disarmament
Plan.
Agency has done a very serious evaluation of the shelter protection use that
Are
they
you
can
saying
expect.
the utter hopelessness depicted tonight is justified, then, to a large extent?
I'm saying that I agree it is an overly optimistic scenario for the immediate term effects and also for the long-term effects. More people would have died than you saw in that movie. If it had been realistic, there would not have been a movie to be made.
Dr.
However,
Williams, yes,
I would
finish
like
and
to
then-
say that we do not have to be here talking about how civil defense can mop up afterwards. We do not have to talk about civil defense in this context. We all have a way of dealing with this, which is not to have the bombs come in the first place. And that, to me, is the humane and sober and civilized point of view to take on this, which is this should not be happening, and we should not have to be here to discuss it.
Dr. Williams?
That's deterrence.
Thank you. Jennifer, of course, and Dr. Ehrlich both exaggerated. They have joined the PSR, the Ground Zero movement, and ABC into one of the most terrifying propaganda films that is designed to scare people. And unfortunately, it's irresponsible because they're scaring children and causing emotional trauma, even at this moment, trying to predict the end of the world. This is irresponsible. As a father and a dedicated physician, I must agree with our scientists that shelters work. The Ground Zero movement will not be able to escape the responsibility for what they're doing to their own children. And I would advise the public to stay away from the Ground Zero movement, stay away from their Ground Zero meetings and candlelight vigils. It's causing unnecessary trauma. You'd be much better off to make plans and preparations for civil defense.
Are there enough doctors to provide that type of help?
Well,
after an attack?
our organization, Doctors for Disaster Preparedness, has analyzed your film even before we saw it again tonight. We estimate that you had a 500 kiloton detonation in downtown Kansas City. It would have leveled the ground for about a 5-mile radius. That left most of your medical facilities in this town intact. It leveled 3 or 4 hospitals in downtown Kansas City, but you have at least 40 or some odd hospitals out in the periphery of your community. The majority of your suburban areas survived. And you have a blessing that ABC failed to show you tonight in their effort to terrify you. There's over 30 caverns with a total space of 80 million square feet. This is enough to accommodate 8 million people, far more than your population. And it's stocked with food and Russian vodka, of all things. And that means that the survival potential is even increased. ABC also failed to show, they seem to think the people in Kansas City are stupid. They show a 24-hour scenario where a war is beginning, nuclear weapons are beginning to be detonated in Europe, and the people of Kansas City are doing nothing. This is an excellent opportunity and a good argument for crisis relocation, to move the children, the women, into the shelters.
Dr. Leaning, couldn't something be done? Isn't there some type of hope if such an event as tonight were to happen in the Kansas City area?
If the event is happening within a 24-hour warning period, I would say there ceases to be hope on a social scale. We have run the course, we've lost the war, doesn't matter who started it, who ended it. The thing is, it's